In this video, we're going to explore groups and components. But first, we need to realize the need for groups and components. So to do that, we're going to draw a rectangle on our screen at 20 feet by 40 feet. So I'll activate my rectangle tool, and then I'm just going to click once to start, move my cursor to suggest a direction, let go of the mouse, and type in 20 apostrophe comma 40 apostrophe enter. So now I've drawn a rectangle at exactly 20 feet by 40 feet. And then I can orbit into 3D. And then let's just pull this up with our push-pull tool. I'll click once to start, move my cursor to suggest a direction, let go of the mouse, and type in, let's say 25 feet. So we have this large block set to exact, precise dimensions. And let's draw another one over here, just a smaller block. We use our rectangle tool. And let's click once to start, move our cursor to suggest a direction, let go of the mouse, and let's type in 10 feet by 10 feet. And you notice that I use I set my dimensions in inches, or rather than feet, I set them in inches because the default units in this model are inches. This eliminates the need to keep hitting the apostrophe sign. We'll hit enter there, and now we have a square 10 feet by 10 feet, and let's use our push-pull tool and pull that guy up by 10 feet as well. So 1, 2, 0, enter. Okay, so we have these two blocks, one large, one small, and what we want to do is demonstrate the need for groups and components. So the basic building blocks of SketchUp are edges and surfaces. Now these edges and surfaces have a tendency to get stuck together, and it can seem confusing and not helpful at all, when in actuality the stickiness of geometry in SketchUp is what makes the program work so well and really makes it so fast. So we need to learn how to control the stickiness of geometry, and to control that we use groups and components. Groups and components are containers for the geometry within SketchUp. So let's take a look at the stickiness of geometry. With your selection tool, triple click on the small cube, and then we're going to go to our move copy tool, and we want to do a precise move from point to point. So I'm going to move from this endpoint. I'll click on that to pick up my cube, and then I want to position it exactly on this bottom right endpoint, so we'll click there. Now watch what happens when I click again to pick it up and move it away. This is the stickiness of geometry in SketchUp. It can be a little bit frustrating, but we just need to learn how to control it. So I'm in the middle of a move command. I can always tap escape to cancel that command, and then I can tap Control Z to undo. So now we're kind of back to where we started here. So this time let's use our selection tool and triple click, and now I've selected all of my connected geometry, and I'm going to right click on the selection and choose Make Group. The group is simply a container holding the geometry or the edges and surfaces that compose that cube. So now when I do the same move with my move copy tool from endpoint to endpoint and then pull that away, you can see that our geometry is no longer stuck together. So that's just kind of a very simple way and one of the first steps to learning how to control the stickiness of geometry in SketchUp. Now let's take a look at another container for geometry called a component. So the two containers are groups and components. A group has zero intelligence. It's simply a container for geometry. A component, on the other hand, has a lot of intelligence. It has a lot of connectivity. Basically, if you edit one instance of a component, all instances will update at the same time. So if you're familiar with AutoCAD, it's similar to a block or even an XREF. And if you're familiar with the Adobe products, that's similar to a smart object. So to create a component, we're going to say that this is a townhouse. So let's go ahead and draw a rectangle on the front of this townhouse to create a window. So I'll just click once to start on the surface, move my cursor to suggest a direction, let go of the mouse, and let's type in let's say 4 feet, 8 feet. enter. So a 4-foot by 8-foot window. Now, what we're going to do is use our selection tool and double click right on that rectangle. When I double click, that selects the surface as well as the bounding edges. Now I can right click directly on my selection and choose Make Component. So we'll say Make Component, and let's call this our window. And notice that we have some other settings here. A description, usually not necessary. Alignment, glue to any. This means that the component will glue itself to any surface. You can choose, a window would probably only go on a vertical surface, but I like to make that distinction while I'm modeling, so I just leave that set to any. And then cut opening, this window is actually going to cut an opening in that surface that it's glued to, and that way we'll be able to see inside of our component. One last important setting is replace selection with component. I can't imagine why you'd ever want to uncheck this, but it seems like somehow this does get unchecked at times. So just make sure that you have that guy checked on. What that means is that the selection here is now going to become a component, and that is what we want. So we'll choose Create, and now we have our component. Now when we have a component selected, it looks very similar to a group when it's selected, but we do get some different behavior out of it. So let's now make a copy of our component. So we'll go to our Move Copy tool, and maybe we'll just make one copy 10 feet up. I'll click once to pick it up, tap Control, and move my cursor. Once I find my blue axis and suggest the direction, I can let go of the mouse and type in 120, enter. And then maybe let's also make a copy of it to the right. And this one I'm just going to kind of eyeball here. So we have our 3 windows. Now with my selection tool, I'm going to right click on any one of these 3 components. Remember, they are all connected together. So I can right click and choose Edit Component. Now this is Component Edit mode. Notice that the rest of the model is kind of grayed out. And also we have this dotted bounding box defining the extents of our component. So to add a little bit of detail to this window, I'll use my Offset tool, hover on that surface, click once to start, move my cursor to suggest the direction, and let go of the mouse. Now I can type in how thick do I want that frame to be. So let's just say 2, enter. Next I can use my Push-Pull tool, and I'll just push this guy in by, let's say, 4 inches. And then now let's assign a material. We'll go to our Paint Bucket tool, and I'll go to my metal. Now here's a little trick. If I was to pick this metal rough, instead of clicking on every single surface in here, what I can do is just hold down Shift. And notice that I get those 3 little squares. This is kind of like a material swap. When I click on this surface, I know that it has the default material already applied to it. So basically I'm going to swap everything in this component that has the default material with the metal rough material. So that just saved me a lot of clicks. Now I can just go back to my translucent materials and apply glass to the window. So again, notice that as we edit one instance of that component, the other 2 are updating as well. And then I can just right click in the white space and choose Close Component. Now let's just add a little bit more detail to our townhouse here. Maybe just throw a rectangle on the front here from midpoint to midpoint. And then I'll use my Push-Pull tool and pull this guy out by, let's say, 12 inches. Alright. Now we can also make copies of our windows. So I like to pre-select a window and then use my Move Copy tool, and I'll just select it from the bottom right corner, click once to pick it up, tap Control to toggle my copy command, and now notice what happens as I turn the corner. That window reorients itself and glues to any surface that I put it on. So we're just going to throw that window maybe right up in here. That looks pretty good. So that's the glue to command, or the glue to properties of a component. Now we also have another feature that's very helpful, and that is the make unique feature of components. So let's say make unique is similar to save a copy as, like say you're working on a Word document and you just want to kind of save a copy of it. That's the similar idea behind make unique. You're starting with the same component, but you're kind of breaking that connectivity from the others. So let's say that these two windows are going to be different than the other component. So I can select the first one, hold down Shift, and add the second one to my selection, and then right click on the selection and choose make unique. Now what that means is that if I go in here and edit this component, only these two are being affected now. So maybe I'll just kind of make this a sliver of a window. So what that means is that when you're working with components, you want to look for repeating elements, lines of symmetry, and similar elements. So here we have windows that are similar, so that's an opportunity for make unique. We also have repeating elements, which are these windows here, so that definitely needs to be a component. Now let's add one more material here. We can go to our brick and cladding, maybe just throw some siding on here. Let's throw that on there. And maybe this will be brick instead. I don't know. Something like that. Okay, so we just want to add a little bit of detail so we can kind of see some changes happening here. So as I mentioned, you want to look for these repeating elements and lines of symmetry. So oftentimes in a townhouse or a townhouse development, let's say there's 6 townhomes in a row, each one of those is a repeating element. But then inside we have further repeating elements such as windows, like we've drawn here. So we can create nested components. So you can create these components nested inside of each other, I guess on an infinite level. Typically if you go more than like 5 levels deep, it might get a little extensive, but for this example we have our townhouse drawn, and the idea is that basically you want to make everything a group. Just about everything should start as a group, and you almost can't make enough groups, because the more groups you create, the less your geometry is going to be stuck together and the easier it is to get to it and modify it. So first off, this whole thing, it needs to be a group. Now, as soon as you're about to copy a group, typically that's when you say, this shouldn't be a group anymore, this should be a component. So then I'll just right click on it and choose Make Component. And how easy was that? Didn't even ask us any questions with a dialog box. So now I can use my Move Copy tool, and I'll click once to pick it up, tap Control or Option on the Mac to toggle my copy command, and I'm going to go move it to the end there and click again to place it. Now, without invoking any other commands, I can type in 5x enter, and that's going to create 5 copies, and in addition to leaving my original behind. So now we have 5 copies of our townhouse. Now let's take a look at what that means. We've created a component, so maybe we want to go in and add like a parapet wall here. So I can right click on this component and choose Edit Component, and we can use our offset tool, and we can offset this guy by, let's say, 8 inches, and then let's pull that parapet wall up by, let's say, 3 feet. So now you can see that each instance of that townhouse component is updating. And at the same time, we can also modify our window component. So we would need to go in another level. So I can right click and choose Edit Component, and now we can maybe make this guy a foot taller. And again, you can see that all instances of that component are updating at the same time. So let's go to our window outliner and take a look at the different levels of this model. So the outliner is actually kind of like a file tree that explains our SketchUp model. So here we have our group, and within there we have these several window components. So, and it's called group. That's actually a component. This is this symbol represents a component, whereas this symbol represents a group. So we can back out of this by right-click and choose Close Component, right-click Close Component. And another tip for you, an easy way to navigate within components is with your selection tool. You can double-click on a component to go in one level, and then we can double-click again to go in another level. And again, you can see those bounding boxes representing the extents of that component. With the selection tool active, you can just tap Escape, and that backs me out one level, and tap Escape again and back out again. Alright, so now we have our townhouses kind of stacked in a row here, and the nice thing about a component is that we have the geometry within is what is linked between each instance of the component. But the container itself can be modified. So it can be scaled or mirrored. So we can really create some very interesting designs that still maintain their efficiency and their linkages. So what I could do is just right-click on this component and choose flip along our component's red. And you can see how that flipped over. And then right-click on this guy and choose flip along our component's red. And so now we're starting to create a pretty realistic townhouse development. Okay. And once you become familiar with these groups and components and nested components, it really becomes very simple. You know, something like this, if this townhouse, if this development was repeating, then what you would do is take all of these guys and basically make these a component. And typically I'll make it a group first and then make it a component. That way I don't have to answer any of those questions. Then I can make a copy. And we can flip this guy along our component's green. And so now they're facing each other. So we can start building our neighborhood. And we'll go ahead and make a copy of those as well. So these are very efficient. You can see that if I double click into any one of these townhomes, I can take the end unit and you can see how those changes are affecting each grouping. Furthermore, if I go in one more level and move a window, you can see how that's affecting every instance of that townhouse. And then if I was to go in and modify the window itself, you can see how that shows up as well. So very efficient models are created by using groups, but mainly components. That's what really saves you a lot of time. If you ever find yourself doing the same revision over and over, it probably should have been a component. So another comment about components, I'm going to close my outliner and go to Window, Components, and I'll just click on the house icon. And what that house icon does is that shows us which components are in our model. So makes it really easy to, you could add another row of townhomes here, and we can start those guys turning. But you can also grab other components. So again, a component is a way of organizing your model, but there's also pre-built components, or these things that you don't want to have to build on your own over and over, such as trees, cars, people, even windows and doors. There's a lot of that stuff out there too. So we can click on this drop down here and take a look at like our architecture components. So we have a bunch of doors and windows and cabinets, and then here we have our construction components. So we have steel cross sections, wood framing, roof details, just a lot of stuff that you really don't want to have to build on your own. So we can grab any of those if we want to throw maybe an AC unit Let's see. And you can see there's a lot of different results here. Here's an AC unit, and maybe we'll just throw this behind the unit. Now, I've just positioned that air conditioner behind this unit, but notice that I was not inside of that component. So it doesn't repeat itself over and over like I really want it to. So what I can actually do is just go to Edit and choose Cut, and cut that component, and then let's go into the townhouse component. I can double click in and double click in. Now I can see that I'm inside of that townhouse component because the rest of the model is grayed out. I can see these bounding boxes, and so I can choose Edit, Paste in Place. This is a great way to move pieces from one group or component to the next. So now we have all of our air conditioning units in there. Now you can also grab, you can actually search the 3D warehouse through the component browser. So the 3D warehouse is provided by Google. It's actually just a collection or a repository for 3D models. Now beware that anybody can post anything they want to the 3D warehouse. So if you're looking for a tree, it's hard to say what you're going to get. Some of it could be really nice, like these guys look pretty nice, but some of them can be pretty bad and pretty heavy too. So sometimes, by heavy I mean sometimes people will build models not in an efficient way, so then it can really bog down your model and cause you more headaches. So just beware. Maybe I'll just try this first one, click on that, and you can see that's downloading. It's downloading a little bit slow, and it's probably going to be a fairly heavy tree, but we'll use it for this example anyway. And it's taking just a moment to load, and there it is. Now you can see that is definitely a pretty heavy tree, and I just click to place it, and then I'm going to kind of zoom in here and let's look at it. But you know what, that's just really bogging my model down, and look how heavy those the blossoms are there, just a bit much. So I'm just going to delete that, and let's go and search for a smart tree. So smart tree. Now a smart tree is a tree that's built in a way that, see how fast that one downloaded. And the smart tree is actually it uses 2D face me components in combined with 3D pieces as well, and kind of creates the illusion of a full 3D tree. Let's see, I know there's a few good ones here. Smart tree, that one's no good. Alright, so that one looks a little bit better. So smart tree 2, I think that was. Okay, so that one looks pretty good. Now here's another important point about components. So now we've got that guy in there, and we're starting to add our detail. Well, every time we download a component from the 3D warehouse, it's actually attaching itself to our model. So if we click on the house icon, you can see that we have our 3D tree. Even though we deleted it, it's still in here. Now this is the same for styles, materials, layers, a lot of different things in SketchUp. They'll stick around unless we actually delete them or purge them. So one easy way to get rid of everything that you don't need is to go to Window, Model Info, Statistics, and click on Purge Unused. And that's going to trash anything and everything that is in our model that we're not using. So, and 90% of the time, that's exactly what you want it to do. Alright, so one more comment about scaling a component is, you know, we looked at how we can flip or mirror these components, and the way that I typically like to do that is by using my scale tool. So what I would typically do is, let's say we want to add one more row here. I think we have space to do that. Use my Move Copy tool. And let's say I wanted to mirror this component? Well, instead of right-clicking and choosing flip along my component's red, usually I have a hard time keeping track of where my axes are. Usually I have those guys turned off. So what I can do is use my scale tool. So we'll go to our scale tool, and then I can scale about the center point of one of these surfaces. I'll click once to start, and now you can see I'm really only affecting the container. This isn't actually affecting the geometry within. If I hold down Control, I can scale about the center point. And if I scale to a factor of -1, you can see that's the same thing as mirroring. So it's a little trick. It makes things a little bit more visual. Rather than going through a right-click menu, I like to use my scale tool when I'm mirroring things. So now we have 6 houses in a row. And let's look at one more example of make unique. So if I was to double-click into this townhouse, really I don't want these blank walls to be here on the sides or on the ends of my townhouse. So what I'd really want to do is select these 2 units and then right-click on my selection and choose Make Unique. What that does is it creates basically that Save a Copy As, and now I can go inside of this component and let's just make a copy of this window, and we'll just throw a few copies down the way here. And look what happens when I orbit around to the other side. So now we have that made unique. So now all of our changes are updating on all of our townhouse units, on our corner units. So again, it's just all about creating the most efficient model possible.